Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Thank you for coming. I'm joined here by quite a few elected officials, members of our administration, and those in local government to talk about a plan that we have put together to try to stabilize Westchester County's financial situation and at the same time benefit our municipal governments and also our school districts. I'm joined from the executive branch by Ken Jenkins, who's our Deputy County Executive, Joan McDonald, who's our Director of Operations, John Nona, the County Attorney, is with us here, Andrew Ferris, our Chief of Staff, Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Operations, Steve Bass from our intergovernmental team, Vic Mallison, I think, was here as well. We have many of there he is back there. We have many of our other team members who are here. We appreciate their presence. I see former Chairman, current County Legislator Mike Kaplowitz from the Board of Legislators, and the Board of Legislators is represented through staff members for Mary Jane Shimsky and some of the other members, and they may be joining us as well. For introduction's sake, because some of them will be speaking, most of them will not, but you may want to be interviewing them after we're finished with this. To the best of my ability, on the front row, we have Gina Piconich, who's the mayor of the village of Mount Kisco. We have Connie West Kehoe, Vice Deputy Mayor for the village of Irvington, Fritz Valanka, who is the village mayor of Portchester. We have Carl Fulgenzi, who is the supervisor for the town of Mount Pleasant, and Bobby Williams from the village of Elmsford. Let's see how many other county executives can pass this test. Mayor of Larchmont, Lorraine Walsh, the town supervisor and head of the Municipal Officials Association, Nancy Seligson, from Mamaroneck Town, from Ossining Dana Leverberg, who's the supervisor, Dan Hochverb, who's the mayor of the village town of Scarsdale, Peter Parsons, supervisor from the town of Lewisboro, Kevin Hansen, supervisor of the town of Poundridge, and Warren Lucas, supervisor for the town of North Salem. We may be joined by one or more other elected municipal officials who are here today. We're also joined by Bob Giordano, who is with the Yorktown, it's not the Chamber of Commerce, but it's a Small Business Association, and we're very much appreciative of your presence here. And we'll touch on any of these entities in a second. The task that brings us here is not to talk about a tax. It is here to talk about how do we stabilize the finances of Westchester County. I've had the pleasure of being county executive for almost 14 months, and in that period of time, we've tried to understand everything that we can about how the government is operating and then try to chart a path going forward. We have presented our first budget, which was adopted by the Board of Legislators, that had within it a 2% property tax increase, and we had some variety of different things we needed to do to balance the budget. But in the process of putting that budget together, we looked at what was the long-term prognosis of Westchester County's finances. And as the bond rating agencies scored us and lowered our bond rating from AAA to AA1, put us on a negative outlook, I said at the time that that was a fair assessment of where we were. We've had a controller's audit that we asked for the very first day in office that scored some of the financial practices of the county and set up warning flags. We are one of the four most stressed, financially stressed entities, local governments in the state of New York. Every municipality's got its issues. School districts have their issues, but Westchester and a few other jurisdictions are at the top of the list of those that have some difficulty. The problem that we face is structural. And it's very important to understand that that structural problem did not happen in a day. It did not happen in one budget. It's not going to be resolved in any one budget. I also recognize, because I've had the fortune over the years of having served in local government as a councilman in my home community, I've served in the Board of Legislators, I was the minority leader at one point and the chairman at one point. I've served in both houses of the state legislature, and I've chaired my county political party. So as Judy Collins sang, I've seen life from both sides now. And the important thing to understand is that we are at a point where clarity and honesty is essential. It is always a reality of politics that none of us want to say something that may be true but unpopular. And oftentimes we're punished by the electorate if we say something that goes beyond what they're expected to hear. But what they need to know now, what you need to know now, and those of you in the press, as you choose to report this, need to understand that the Westchester County financial picture is in a crisis situation and will only get worse if we don't take bold action. Now, there's a school of thought that says all we need to do is cut back, consolidate, spend less money, you're spending too much money, and that's spoken by people that do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of what this government has to do. And when I say have to do, because we are mandated for anywhere between 60 to 70% of the services that we must provide by the state government and the federal government, the programs we have. Our largest department is the Department of Social Services. I believe our second largest department is the Department of Corrections. We do not have the option to not house prisoners in this county. We do not have the option to not have a probations department to deal with those prisoners when they have paid their debt to society. We do not have an option to treat sewer treatment. There are different ways you can do it, and you may be able to save a dime on a dollar, but the concept that somehow we're going to be able to go forever, not raising property taxes, and still doing the things that we're tasked to do is foolish. And in fact, I think when some people advocate that, they advocate something that's malevolent. They are trying to tip the argument away from rationality and toward emotion. Every one of these people behind me have to do the responsibility of preparing and financing a balanced budget. No municipal government in the county is just a municipal government too. We're bigger than most, a little bigger than Yonkers, bigger than our friends here in the village and the towns and the small cities. But we do not have the ability to run a deficit like the federal government does. And we only have very limited forms of taxation open to us. And that's at both the local level and the county level. The county has a few more tools than the municipal government does. But since the imposition of a property tax cap, that has limited our ability to use the one tool that we had, and rightfully so, because we are the most highly taxed county in New York State, if not in the nation. But we're the most highly taxed county not because of the villages and the towns and the cities or even the county, but because so much of our expenditure on schools is also structured through property taxes. It's the three taxes together that make up the burden that people are frustrated by. And if a village, a town, and the county each showed certain control, the school district would also have to do that. Now, school district financing is another thing entirely. It's structured differently as a singular service, and there is state support for that, but they are under stress as well. And the plan that I have here tries to help address that as well. But the bottom line is this, and I'm being very simple and straightforward in it. I'm not being alarmist. I'm not a Cassandra. If we do not get additional, steady forms of revenue outside of property tax revenue, this county government will go under, and in due time, so will the municipal governments. Let me repeat that. If we do not get a steady stream of non-property tax revenue, municipal governments in this state will be led by the county, but we won't be the last one. We will go under. And going under involves a fiscal control board coming in from the state, which has been done in Nassau County currently and in Yonkers. It's not for lack of understanding the fiscal policy that we need. It's not for lack of making tough decisions. It's for lack of revenue that cannot support the tasks we have. As a county government, we're tasked with housing the homeless. That task is not debatable. There's a moral reason to do it, but there is also a practical reason to do it, and there is a legal reason that we're responsible to do that. And we can't control the growth of homeless in our urban center cores. We can't change the fact that a person starts out in community A and winds up in community B on the streets. But we do have the responsibility to deal with this. And if we're not honest about what our burdens are, then we can't be honest about whether or not this is a reasonable solution. And I'm certainly prepared at any point in time to have this discussion with members of the press, with members of the community at large, because it is that important. And least you think that all of that experience I talked about, I spent 20 years in corporate America. My responsibility in departmental structures was to have balanced budgets and to accomplish a mission with that budget. So I'm not merely a person with government experience. I have sufficient business experience. There's others here as well that do. So we're not talking through our hat. This is a serious moment, and it requires serious people to look at serious solutions to this. Now, what we put forward in the Westchester County Property Taxpayers Protection Act begins with what we intend to do so that we can try to stabilize our situation. The first most important thing, I think we all accept the fact that property taxes cannot be raised sufficient to solve this problem. And to try to do it that way will chase people out of the county as they already have been doing. So this plan that I put forward will allow us the resources in Westchester County during the 2-year period of time that this would be in effect, that we would submit, as Westchester County Executive Branch, we will submit to the Board of Legislators 2 consecutive budgets for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 that do not raise property taxes. Now, the board has the right to adjust that budget as they see fit. It would be our effort to work with the board to finalize a budget that does not raise property taxes. No one can tell the board what to do. They will have their discussions and they will go where they have to go. But it will be our intent as an administration not merely to present a budget, but to work with the board to try to finalize a budget that does not raise property taxes. And if it's possible to lower it by a little bit, we'll do that. But that'll depend on factors that are beyond our control. The second thing that this proposal does, this will give us the ability to put a designated amount of money in our reserve fund at the county government level in each of the coming years that will help build back our reserve fund. Our reserve fund now in round numbers is about $70 million. Not too long ago, it was at $170 million. The rating agencies looked at the drop in the reserve fund in a very negative light. Negative outlook gets put on the way they look at us. Why? Because for consecutive years now, we've had to go into the reserve fund to balance the budget. Why? Because we didn't submit budgets with adequate revenue. We had revenue based on speculative decisions, and in the second of 2 years that the Board of Legislators had already shown that they weren't prepared to do a particular transaction, but it was counted in the budget the second time through. $35 million worth of fund balance had to be allocated to cover those 2 years. In addition to that, we had outstanding union contracts, and for the largest of all our unions, over 3,200 members of CSEA, to settle a 7-year contract. Not one dime was set aside for that. If you know you have a bill coming, you set aside a few bucks to try to cover it when the final bill comes in. No money set aside for that. And the cost to the county government, again, in the $30 million range of what we had to do to solve a 7-year outstanding situation. And union contracts that were negotiated and signed, approved by the board, which when we came into office, we did not challenge for the uniformed services, but were not fully budgeted in the budget, something to the tune of about another $9 million. These are fiscal decisions that were made. I'm not looking back to be critical for the sake of politics. I'm looking back to explain why we are where we are and why we have to do what we have to do. We are in the county government, in a unique situation. This is not your garden variety situation. This is no additional revenue coming in for an extended period of time and costs that required us to go into our reserve fund and scoop more money out and scoop more money out in the same way that you would go into your savings account to pay your monthly rent or your monthly mortgage payment. Sooner or later, you run out of savings and you still have a mortgage or a rent payment to make. So this plan puts in a steady amount of money. We assume it'll be in the vicinity no less of $15 million. That seems to be a reasonable number, and we intend to do that on an annual basis to try to build ourselves up. The rating agencies will not restore us to AAA bond rating until they can see a consistent set of actions, not a singular year set of actions. So we put this plan in place not to cover what our needs are for 2020, but to put us on a path where we could do this in consecutive years. In addition, what this plan will do is it will allow us to change any plans that we have put already in place in this budget for one-shot financing and anything that we put in place to borrow for what's considered an operating expense. In the budget that was approved by the board, we stepped away primarily from bonding for pension costs. There's a little money set aside in case the estimates are above a certain number, but most of it was paid for by the budgeted amounts in this budget. But we did not do the same with certiorari. Certiorari, I assume you all know, are payments that are made for commercial taxpayers who grieve the taxes in court, and the court finds that they should be getting a tax refund from what they were taxed at the time. And the certiorari funds put aside historically, when I served on the board 20 years ago, was a budget line, an operating line of the budget. Estimates were made about how many of these settlements might happen during the calendar year, fiscal year, calendar year, and that we would pay for it in the money that we had budgeted, and that would be satisfactory. We've not done that lately. We bonded for it over an extended period of time, and this budget continues the bonding for it. That will be wiped out by us doing this today. And in addition to that, the one-shot deals. Everybody talked quite a lot about the transfer of parking lots by the county center from the county government to the county local development corporation. It was not a privatization. It was not a moving to a non-government structured thing where you lose control over it. But even so, I admitted at the time it's a one-shot financing deal to get us through the year. And I said at the time we wouldn't do it if we get sufficient non-property tax revenue from the state. That is what this will allow us to do. So any concerns, I know my good friend David McKay Wilson isn't here. I'm sure Mark will take the message back to him that this will, and then he and I can talk about something else on Facebook ad nauseum. But But the bottom line is, in principle, those kinds of practices, and they've happened in the past. I'm just talking about what we're doing right now. They will stop in the current year, and they will stop for the next 2 budget years as we go forward. When we sit in front of Fitch and S&P, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's, and we tell them we're putting money back steadily in our reserve fund, we're stopping the one-shots, we're stopping the bonding for ongoing expenses, we're serious about this, then we will begin to see our bond rating rise back up again. And it won't happen overnight. And there's one other thing we're going to show Moody's, we hope, and Fitch and S&P, that we are not doing this on a partisan basis. We are reaching out, Republicans and Democrats, our municipal governments, our school districts, and our county government together. That doesn't mean we don't have our disagreements. It doesn't mean we don't fight about different things. That democracy is about debate and conflict that can be resolved. But it also is about joining forces to solve problems. And that is a message that we collectively are sending to our friends in D.C. Solve problems. That's what they send us here for. That's why they send you to the town board, to the county board, to whatever these pieces are. So that third component of cleaning up some of these bad financial practices, we think will put us on the path back to that situation that we need. Now, the county government is authorized, as are city governments under New York state law, to levy sales taxes. And whenever any city or county wants to go above the constitutional limitation that they have, we go to the state for authority. Towns and villages and school districts do not have that authority. They have no other means of getting revenue. But when I was a senator and an assemblyman and I was in and out of the village of Larchmont, I sat with Lorraine Walsh in the small little conference room in Larchmont Village watching them go over the budget. I sat in the conference rooms in the town of Mamaroneck offices. I sat in the city. Josh Cohn has joined us, the mayor of Rise City. I was a member of the Rise City Council, but I sat in the mayor's conference room watching budgetary conversations of years before, watching my friends in local government struggle with trying to make ends meet without the benefit of additional revenue streams. As an assemblyman and as a senator, I fought for them to have hotel occupancy tax revenue streams. I came out of that industry, but I also knew that it was essential. And those communities that have that revenue stream have a helpful revenue stream. In the case of the village of Rye Brook, it's a decisive revenue stream because of what's in their situation. So now in this position, I wouldn't turn my back on those communities. I wouldn't say, good luck. We have to take care of our problems. So this proposal has a 30% share back of revenue targeted to the municipal governments, general governments, and to the school districts as well. It is positioned for the state to consider at 20% of all additional revenue, sales tax revenues that would be generated by this, would go to municipal governments that are participating in the program, and 10% to the school districts. Why that percentage? Because in Albany, I speak from experience, the effort to try to put money into school aid is a prominent, aggressive, ongoing activity. There are lobbying organizations that work for school aids, and as a legislator, I fought for Yonkers, I fought for Portchester, school aid, New Rochelle, the communities that needed it, and all the legislators do that. The constituency is not the same for municipal governments, and there may be an elimination of the AIM program at the state. I can't predict whether that'll happen or not. If that does happen, that's a further decimation to the general governments. So we put in this 20% of the revenues to go to the general governments. Now, somebody says, how about 30%? Well, as soon as you get into the financial problems that we've got, then we can talk about reallocating it. But we've got serious problems. But we wouldn't cut them out. So the point is, even though the towns and the villages and the school districts do not have taxing authority to do this on their own, we partner with them and we will share back a significant amount of that money. Now, by the way, each community will do what they do with that money. There's no provisions for them to use it a certain way, but I would suspect many of them, because they're under the same property tax pressures that we feel, will probably do the same. I can tell you that when Rye Brook Village got the extra hotel occupancy tax money, their property taxes went down, increases annually went down under 1% a year. And so it resolved some of the issue. But it was done by the decision makers, and each of these people are leaders in their own right. They don't have to run their budgets past me. Whatever they think is appropriate is between them and the voters of their jurisdiction. So where's all this money coming from? It's coming from a change in our sales tax rate across Westchester County to create parity throughout the county. Currently, Westchester County has a 7 3/8 sales tax rate. 3/8 of that go to the MTA, and if you look at all the other counties in the MTA region, the 12 counties in the region, each of them have a 3/8% add-on. What the core rate is 7% and divided between the state and the county government. The county's got the lesser portion of that. And now we're at 7 3/8. Rockland County is at 8 3/8. Putnam County is at 8 3/8. The city of Mount Vernon is at 8 3/8. The city of White Plains is at 8 3/8, and the city of New Rochelle is at 8 3/8. And the county outside of those places are at 7 3/8. So the proposal brings to parity the sales tax rate in the other jurisdictions of Westchester County. Yonkers remains at 8 5/8, which is a quarter above that. 2/8, 1/4 above the other ones, but everywhere else in Westchester County there'll be a similar tax rate. Now, ask yourself, when was the last time you shopped in any location and asked about what the tax rate was in that jurisdiction? We finished the holiday shopping season. I shopped a little bit in a variety of different places, and I tell you, I know all about this stuff. I never once asked what the tax rate was because I knew. But there are reasons to shop in certain stores. They happen to be in certain communities, and in those communities, the rates are what they are. And if I have a reason to buy something in White Plains, I do. If I have a reason to buy something in Portchester, Fritz, I did shop in Portchester. I do. And most people operate under that. Now, by the way, if I were to shop in White Plains, which I do, I work in White Plains, I could go to the checkout counter and say, by the way, I'm a resident of Rye, 10580. I want to be charged the 10580 tax, which is 1% less. How many people do that? Very few. Do you do it? You don't have to answer this, but think to yourself, do you do this? So before you write and editorialize about how this is going to change and move people's decision-making, ask yourself, honestly, does it change your decision-making? Now, we have here Joe Scamato. I don't know if he's in the room. If he isn't, he should be. Joe just recently got engaged to his girlfriend, their fiancée now. We're very happy for Joe. Congratulations. Joe just went out and bought a beautiful diamond ring. I'm sure he thought about the sales tax on the diamond ring. I don't know. He may have bought that in Portchester, too. But, and certainly when people buy automobiles or, significant new kitchen, all new kitchen appliances, then the sales tax number comes in place. But it's important to understand the human dynamic of this. If you see a lamp for $100 and you buy it for $100, if you buy that lamp at 7 3/8, you will pay $7.38 in sales tax. If you buy that lamp at 8 3/8, you will pay $8.38. So the lamp that you buy for $100 will cost you either $107.38 or $108.38. That is the practical reality of what this means in an individual purchase. We are saying that that transaction, the sales transaction, is a more fair way to fund the programs of the county government than going back to the property taxpayers to generate more money through property taxes. Now consider the metric here. In Westchester County, 1% of property tax increase is $5.5 million revenue to the county government. If we have a gap of, give you a big number, $70 million, that's roughly equivalent to a 0.5% increase in the sales tax, and $70 million is equatable roughly to about a 12% increase in property tax. So ask yourself, if you're going to buy a $100 lamp and you're going to pay $1 on that lamp, you buy a pair of blue jeans, I don't even know what these things go for, $80, and you're paying an extra 80 cents on it, versus a 12% increase in your property taxes? How could that possibly be, from a consumer standpoint, an equal trade-off? And then to consider that people who buy in a local jurisdiction from outside of the area will pay that sales tax to the local jurisdiction. So it's not just paid for by the people who reside here. And it's paid for by everybody that purchases an item, not just those who own property in the area. So while sales taxes are argued to be regressive, property taxes are more regressive. Let me go one step further. I know we're getting to 201 on taxes, but I said this is a time for serious discussion. All right? That's why this is, and is this on the final? Yes, it's on the final. It's on my final. When you consider what happens with regressivity, consider that the poorest people in Westchester County primarily live in the city of Yonkers, in the city of Mount Vernon, and then to a fair degree, the city of New Rochelle and the city of White Plains. There are poor people in every community that in this county. And there are wealthy people in those 4 communities. But the highest concentration of the poorest people are in the cities that are already paying 8 3/8%. So they're already paying a higher sales tax. When you look at the wealthier communities, they are the ones that are paying the lower amount of sales tax today as residents. Now, the county government provides a wide variety of services. I touched on a few of them. But when you go through them in detail, you'll see that most of what we spend money on are services for people who are poor. We have a public health department that has public health clinics. Those health clinics generally are not needed by people who have their own private doctor and their medical group, but they're there for poor people who have to be immunized against a disease. The bus system that we have, if you have a car, you don't go on the bus system. But if you don't have a car and you're across the street, you're in Petrillo Plaza in Mount Vernon, you're getting on a public bus to go to school, to go to shop, to go perhaps to a doctor's office, to go to work every day. Those people are the poor people in this county. That's what county tax dollars pay for in terms of services. So the argument about regressivity, which I remember hearing back in graduate school, is factored into a unique situation here, where our 4 cities, with a concentration of the poorest people, are already paying the highest property sales taxes. And those that are not in that situation, there are some exceptions to be sure. Now, just to summarize the narrative portion of this. We are looking for the support of our state delegation to advocate for this. We are looking for the governor and both houses of the legislature to agree to put this in the budget to be adopted on March 31st in Albany. Why do we ask for that? If it's adopted in the March budget, then it can go into effect by July. If it goes into effect by July, any of the villages behind me who are putting their budgets to bed in the spring will have an infusion of money that will benefit them for the greater portion of their budget year. If, and this, by the way, applies to the school districts as well, because the school districts, I think, are on a July 1, June 30th budget. If we start to see, the revenue itself won't come until the end of the quarter, but if the tax starts on July 1st, the increase starts on July 1st, then they can accrue money that will be manna from heaven in the middle of their budget years, and will handle any problems that they may have in their municipal budgets, if it can be done in the budget. Now, the Assembly and the Senate and the governor, they're the 3 entities in a room. You can't say the 3 men in the room now because you've got a woman in the room. But the 3 entities operate differently. Obviously, I've not been part of the executive branch up there. I've been in both of the 2 houses. The Assembly operates in one way. The Senate operates a little bit differently. And I am sensitive, we are all sensitive, to the fact that each house will come to their decision on their own. The various state legislators have said to us individually, privately, how they feel about this, but they will go through a certain process as an entity, and it's not for me at this point to try to say this is what you should do. All I can say is what I've said earlier. We need this like we're breathing air. And I'm not going to accept any pushback where people say there's another path. All you have to do is eliminate a department. Take your workforce, which went from 5,000 people down to 4,000 people. Take it down another 1,000 people. Sell off a few more of your assets. Then you'll get through it. That's not the long-term path. That doesn't do. The state legislature will have to think about that and discuss that, as will the governor. I have respect for them. They're all friends of mine. But as you learn in government, party affiliation and friendship comes to a halt when we're talking about dollars and cents. And everybody's worried about their corporate interest. But I tell you, as I stand here, I worry about the corporate interest of the village town of Mount Kisco. I worry about the corporate interest of the Byram Hills Schools District. That's what's wrong with politics. We only worry about ourselves. We have to worry about the totality of this, how it all fits together. And I would argue, just as we stood together, figuratively and directly, in terms of dealing with this Con Edison moratorium, or as we joined together to deal with any other issues that come down the pike, we join and we ask the state government to be our partner. Help us understand the problems that we have trying to deliver service. Same people that you represent. The same people that walk down the same streets. They're in your Senate district, that they want certain things for government to provide, and they want us to do that with the least amount of cost possible. And that is what we're trying to do. And that is why we're trying to do this as a group, to ask for what we think is a less impactful source of revenue, moderately asked for. It keeps us at or below the competitive areas around us. It handles the regressivity issue of the poor and the wealthy. It shows at the county level a responsible way to budget and a responsible way to deal with fiscal policies. We put a package together that we put before the state legislators and we say, please help us. Help us, my friends, help us. Help us stabilize our finances so that we can do the things that we can do and that we can go forward together. And that it's not a I win, you lose, or you win and I lose, that we all win. That we all win. I'm going to ask a couple of my colleagues here who have been willing to share a few thoughts. And in most cases, the municipal officials don't necessarily have to agree with every element of this. I don't treat this as a blanket endorsement, but this is a way for them to get needed revenue that will help them. And so with that, I'm going to ask, I think, our Supervisor Warren Lewis from North Salem to share a few thoughts. Warren?
Thanks very much, George. I want to thank the county exec for bringing this forward. I'm maybe a little unique up here. This is my 29th year on the town board in North Salem. I've been supervisor since 2010, and I've gone through budgets upon budgets. And when this originally came forward many years ago, when we were sharing in part of the sales tax with the county, it was an absolutely huge difference to my town, and it was many years that we were able actually to stay at the same tax level without increasing taxes. And I would hope that this would do the same thing. There's very few places to get money from, right? It's real estate taxes, it's fees, and it's some type of consumption tax. And as the county exec laid out, municipalities like towns are not allowed to go forward and do that in sales tax. And so for him to actually put this together for the county, to think of the towns and the municipalities is really phenomenal, and very, very much appreciate it. We could have a whole discussion on mandates, and you weren't forceful enough on that, but I bet, you can assume that retirement, that's something that we have to do, but there are other things that many states throughout the U.S. don't do, and it's 40% of the county budget. 40% of the money that they collect in taxes goes out to Medicaid. There's 2 states in the U.S. that dump it on local property taxes. New York's one. We also pay a huge amount of money in MTA and stuff. So these things that are forced on us, we need some type of means of getting money from other places. And again, I want to thank you very much for doing this. Very, very helpful to the municipalities. Thanks, George.
The mayor of the village town of Mount Kisco, Gina Pickenich. Gina?
I just want to start out by thanking the county executive and also all on his team. This is about a solution. So when you have a challenge and you have a problem, you have to work that problem and identify a solution. And every organization requires fiscal strength and stability in order to be able to deliver services, and government is no different. So our county executive has put forward a smart plan, generates the needed recurring revenue, builds reserves, it holds the line on property taxes. And in this proposal, he's giving part of it back to our local municipalities for us to get recurring revenue so that we can work to hold the line on property taxes. This is really important. We all know that. We all live here in Westchester County. So we've got municipal leaders from across the county here standing in support. And so I think a key message here is to those up in Albany: we need your support. We need for you to give Westchester the leeway that it needs to put itself on the firm financial footing. And we've been taking a couple of hits, and so we need support from Albany. We're here together as partners, and so as our county executive has said, we depend on Albany to be our partners as well. Thank you.
I guess I should invite any of my other colleagues in local government to share thoughts if they'd like to. And just if you'd like to, feel free, and just introduce yourself at the microphones. Anyone?
It's been said.
I'm going to share a quick anecdote, then we'll open it up to questions. When I served in the state assembly, and I sat, in the many rows that the 150 assembly members sat in, I sat next to a woman who represented Niagara Falls. You sit next to somebody for a couple of years, and you develop a friendship, and you kind of chat, and you talk about each other's worlds that sent you here. And there was a particular bill that came up that I thought was a negative impact on Westchester. And in the assembly, you press a button to register a desire to speak. This is all done by hand motion in the Senate, but in the Assembly it's done by automatic machine. And so as I pressed the white button, it was kind of late in the afternoon. I think they wanted the debate to end. And so she leans over to me. She says, "What are you doing this for?" And I said, "Well, I've got to speak out on this. This hurts Westchester." I said, "It's a real problem for Westchester." And she says, "Westchester doesn't have any problems." And she said it in jest, and we're friends. But she represented an area in Niagara Falls that has severe problems, and no one minimizes the difficulty in Niagara Falls. But there is a perception that somehow Westchester, because of the John Cheever novels, or because this is where Laura Petrie and Rob Petrie lived, or Dan Draper got off the train, and all that stuff, that somehow Westchester is this chosen place where our only problem is when we don't get breakfast in bed. Westchester is ground zero for the impact on salt. No other county in this state is going to be hurt more by salt, even with the $10,000 deduction, than Westchester County is. We've dealt in press conferences and other conversations about a moratorium on gas hookups that is Westchester only by Con Edison. No moratorium in Nassau County, no moratorium in Rockland County, Westchester only. And when you start to look at these things, you begin to say, well, no matter what the perception of Westchester is, we need to be treated as fairly as every other county. When I sat in both houses of those legislatures, I voted any number of times to help out the people who were flooded in Lake Ontario, people on Long Island that were trying to get capital projects to improve their transportation or their drinking watershed, to deal with the problems of shutting down a gas-fired power plant in the western part of the state. And time again, no great heroics, I did what I thought was appropriate for the state of New York to be helpful to all the other parts of New York without worrying about what was in it for Westchester, what was in it for my district in the Sound Shore, or my Senate district, that crescent from Bedford to East Yonkers. It's time now for people to understand that we too have needs. And whatever our generic wealth is, we need the assistance that we need. We're there for Brooklyn. We're there for Buffalo. We're there for Brookhaven. We need those places to be there for us right now. And we're not asking for 10 cents from the state. We're asking for authority. Let us find the way to get the money, to share it back, and to do these things as part of a package of activities. And by so doing, we stabilize ourselves, and we do with that which is right. With that, I'll open it up for any questions from the press. Certainly, I'll try to handle them. If you want to speak with any of my colleagues, I'll be happy to bring them to the microphone. Tony.
Can I ask Mr. Lewis, you're a Republican, right?
Yep.
Is it difficult for you to support a tax hike of any kind, let alone a sales tax hike?
Oh, so my last name's Lucas, and I know he knows that. So, no, not really. You know, right now we get about 10% of our budget money, from sales tax. And so any Republican out there, I think, that has a problem with this, if they want to give the money back and we'll split it up with the other communities, I'm okay with that. So I don't think so. The money comes from someplace every year. There is no one out there that has a 0% increase year to year for extended periods of time. And by the way, in our town, we did for 10 years, so I understand the situation that you're in right now. So the question is, does it come from sales tax? Does it come from fees? Does it come from real estate taxes? And I think all of us know people that live in our towns and villages, municipalities that have no money, that can't afford the increases, 2%, 3%, 4%. We're all under 2%. And it's caused some problems with capital improvements, road paving, things of that nature. So I look at this, it's a consumption tax. If you don't want to buy the car, you don't want to buy the ring that Joe just bought, I guess, you don't have to pay the tax. However, when I go ahead and I charge somebody in their house an extra $300 or $400 that absolutely can't afford it, I end up owning their home at some point in time. And so I look at this as beneficial to the communities in Westchester. Obviously, you need to save money also, and that's what I think all of us try to do on an individual basis. But no, I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
Would you call it the least bad option out there? I mean, how would you say it?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it the least bad. There are a lot of other ones that are probably a lot worse. But no, I think having another source of income is not a bad thing. Having something where people can decide, yes, I want to do this, no, I don't, is not something that is as impactful as me sitting there and deciding that everybody in town gets a 3 or 4% increase. I had to override the tax cap this year. Why? Because you can't get rid of recycling anymore, right? The whole concept of single stream, nobody wants plastic, glass, or anything else. And so I had to go 3.1% increase to cover a garbage bill. Now, there's nobody out there that says, hey, don't pick up my garbage anymore. So those are the things that we're struggling with. As the county exec was saying, we're not talking about these grandiose things. We're talking about very, very basic things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's running a sewer system or collecting garbage, right? So if there's no inflation and nobody wants any increases or nobody wants any services, then it's easy to get rid of taxes and easy to get rid of fees and stuff, but that's not the reality we're in. So, thank you.
Other questions? Martin?
Yeah, so this, according to the material, it's projected to raise $140 million.
Over the course of a full year.
Right, over a full calendar year. And if 20% goes to the towns, municipalities, that's $28 million. Another 10% of the school districts, that's 14.
Correct.
So where does the other almost $100 million go to?
Well, the county receives the remaining $98 million. We're going to take a piece of that. We estimate it to be about $15 million that will go into the reserve fund. Then we're looking at the pay-as-you-go process that I just described, where we'll have no further one-shots. In the first year of this, in the half year of this, if it happens for this half year, $23 million of it will go to balance our budget in lieu of the parking lot transaction that we spoke of. We also had a couple of other transactions that were considered one-shots in the budget. We're also looking at the probability now that the state may not allow the counties and local governments to take any of the internet sales taxation money. There was an expectation that once you made internet sales taxation possible, that it would fit into the normal mode, and now the discussion in Albany is to take that money away from the normal mode, and that's probably about a $5 million, $6 million hit for our budget, and anybody who projected additionally is that. We're dealing with a host of capital projects that we have to move through the system for a host of different reasons, as you can imagine. And we've been able to do as few of those as we can afford to do, and we're going to have the opportunity to accelerate those capital projects to deal with that. We also talked about, I mentioned the certiorari accounts. We're scheduled to borrow for the certiorari accounts. This will, I will honor the commitment that I've made, then we go from budgeting this much in our county budget for bonding for certioraries to this much that will actually pay for whatever the certioraries are, and that number will be a multiple millions of dollars, which we don't know. We generally assume that every year there's going to be a 6% increase or so in healthcare costs. At the county level, that's probably about $9 million, $8 million year over year. We don't know what the pension costs are going to come in at. If we get this revenue, we won't have to use the borrowing mechanism that we put in the budget as a catch-all. We budgeted $83 million for pension costs expected when we get the letter from Tom DiNapoli sometime around December. If that number's higher, then we have to have money to do that with it. And all of that will come from what this represents. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you go through the county budget and you make comparisons between this year and, say, 5 or 6 years ago, you will see how many less police officers that we have in our county public safety department. You'll see how much less staffing there is reliably in our parks. A host of different things that represent not just, put jobs back in, but public safety. If you don't have anybody on duty in a park and somebody has a problem, that's a park allocation of money, but that's a matter of public safety for the individual that's walking through a nature center or something of that nature. So Joan McDonald and working with Larry Sewell is tasked with looking at how the operation of the county government works and with the budgetary circumstances. And what I would suspect we would do, if this thing does, if we do get the authority from the state, we then have to submit implementation legislation to the Board of Legislators. They will have open public discussion about it, meetings and so forth. In the conveyance that we give to the Board of Legislators, we will include the commitments that we've made about what the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 budgets are going to look like as we present them. And then I think in that form, you're going to get the kind of open public discussion of what are we going to do and start adding up the numbers. This is going to be 15 million, maybe 20. This is going to be X million. This is going to be X million. How does it come up to that total? Now, if this goes into effect for half a year, all the numbers are halved. So we're talking about 49 million, 14 million, and 7 million within the balance of this year. If for any reason this does not go into the state budget, then the next bite of the apple will come before the end of the legislative session. Generally, by practice, the legislature will not pass tax bills until the very end of the session, and often they bundle it up in one big bill. It's nicknamed the Big Ugly because it's an ugly-looking, multiple-headed bill. And if that happens at the end of June, then perhaps the earliest we could expect is a September, at the latest an October implementation, which would mean a quarter of those projected numbers. And that becomes pretty tight if I'm going to not do the 23 million transaction deal, and instead of getting 98 annually, I get a quarter of that. Well, that's around 23 million just about. So that really doesn't give me much flexibility for the balance of this year because I'm going to honor the commitments I've made.
In a full year, assuming a full year, how would the money be divvied up between the different municipalities and the different, would that be based on?
There's a formula based on population. We've done a rough estimate for it as now. The concern that I have is we don't know if the state is going to try in any way, shape, or form to modify our proposal, and that could always happen. And, you know, as they say, they can make us an offer we can't refuse. They have the power to either let it happen, not happen, or happen in a modified form. And we can lobby and push and argue, but at the end of the day, if they adopt it in a modified form, that's going to be the way it gets adopted. And that adoption may change the numbers. I've certainly not encouraged any village or school board that's doing the budgets now to assume that this revenue is solid. It's not. But the hope is that if it does come through, if it comes through in the budget time, it will come in enough time for villages and for school districts to adjust budgets accordingly, knowing that they have the sure revenue. And whenever you're estimating sales tax, it's always wise to underestimate based on what you think is going to happen, because the amount of money you generate is based on economic activity, which nobody can truly predict. If you overestimate it, you do it, but you got to do it with your eyes wide open, knowing that there's the possibility that you could have a budget shortfall before the end of that year. But that's the way it would be done in terms of this year and the rollout. Then, of course, next year, you start with a full-year projection. We're on a fiscal year budget. All of the towns and the 2 cities that are within this consortium are on fiscal year calendar years. So they would all go into their budget cycle and discussions that would lead to November and December adoptions of budgets, knowing that they had the revenue stream.
And there'd be a similar formula for school districts as there is.
Yes, the similar formula. And, you know, we're at a point where the legislation doesn't highlight what that formula is, but I suspect in order for this thing to happen, we're going to have to plunk down with charts and sort of indicate how those things are going to happen, so they'll all be comfortable with it. John? Yes. If any of you want to sit down, by the way, feel free. Feel free, seriously. I don't want you to, you know, like this is an after-school class and we all got caught chewing gum or something. John?
Yeah, you have a title for this proposal, Westchester County Property Taxpayers Protection Act. Has to be introduced in Albany. Do you have a sponsor for this bill yet?
Well, here's the situation. The bill has been filed in the Assembly. The bill number currently is 4343, but there's an amendment that has to be made to the bill. When it was filed, the provision wasn't exactly as we had identified. So we expect there'll be an A version of the bill, meaning a modified version of the bill. So at this moment, the bill number A4343A, sponsored by Gary Pretlow of Mount Vernon. However, we're trying to have it adopted in the budget. So for that purpose, we're not looking for standalone legislation with a bill. We're looking for them to amend the Article 7 section of legislation. There's separate Article 7 bills in this area. This would be the revenue bill. And the Article 7 language, when modified, would accommodate this provision, and then would come to pass without there being a bill number and a vote and so forth by the legislature proper. They would be voting on the overall Article 7 bill with all the other things that are included in it.
And the other thing, and maybe just a little bit of confusion on my end, you had said municipalities that are part of the program. So is it fair to say that there are some municipalities that?
Well, yeah. Here's the situation. So you know, the cities have the right to levy their own sales taxes. They do not need the county's authority to do it. 4 cities, the 4 largest of our 6 cities, have done so: Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, White Plains. They're not part of this consortium. They're already charging 8 3/8 in 3 of them, and 8 5/8 for Yonkers. Yonkers' rate was just raised a couple of years ago to address a Yonkers municipal crisis. And by the way, that's a precedential action by the legislature and the governor to increase a sales tax. In recent memory, it happened in Yonkers a couple of years ago. Now, the remaining communities, there are 2 cities: Rice City, which is where I live. Josh Cohn is the mayor of Rice City, and the city of Peekskill. They joined this consortium back almost 30 years ago when County Executive Andy O'Rourke put together a similar coalition. I know that because, long of tooth that I am, I was a member of the Rise City Council when we voted to join the consortium. At that point in time, the decision in Rise City and the decision in Peekskill, I don't know who the decision makers were then, is that those two cities would benefit more by being part of the consortium and sharing revenue than by just relying on the sales tax generated by the businesses in their community. And, just to give you a quick thumbnail sketch, if you have a lot of car dealerships in your community, you generate a lot of local sales tax. If you don't have many businesses like that, then you don't generate as much sales tax. You're better off in the consortium taking a piece of the pie. At any point in time that the city of Rye or the city of Peekskill chose to leave this consortium, they could do that. But then they would have to go on their own to the state legislature to ask for 1% or whatever percentage it would be. And I will tell you, it's going to be much, much harder for them to do it by themselves than being part of the consortium. But those two have that right.
How many members are part of the consortium?
Well, you've got 45 municipalities altogether. The 4 that I've indicated are out, and the remaining 41 would all be shareholders of the $28 million on the annual basis as it would be divided. And obviously, I think Warren Lucas said accurately, if you don't want it, other guys will be more than happy to take your share. Sorry, Warren. Now, on the school district side, the school districts, the same thing applies. There are 4 school districts that are structured within municipalities that have sales taxes. But those cities do not share their revenue back with their school districts. So make a note, we're doing something at the county that the other cities do not do. Well, Yonkers is an exception because Yonkers city government runs the school district. They're all together once. You really have to exempt Yonkers from it. But in other places where there are local sales taxes, there are not share-back provisions between the general government and the school district. So we are doing that which others do not do. And we would share it back with those school districts. And, many of those districts are in tremendous need. However, they do have, as I said before, the direct revenue stream of direct school aid, and that is a major part of the state budget. I expect they're going to be debating that now in the next couple of weeks. When I was in the Senate, I was the ranking minority member of the Education Committee, and Education Committee comes down to how much school aid can you get for Long Island, for the city, for whatever your jurisdictions are. Other questions? Mark? I'm sorry.
Have you gotten an indication from the governor's office or the Senate Majority Leader's office that they'd be willing to support this?
Well, no one has said outright that they're going to support it. We've had good meetings with key staff people, budget director and some other people in the executive chamber. We've met and had informal discussions with members of the Senate. We've had similar with the Assembly. We had Assembly delegation meetings. Everybody is, as they usually do, playing their cards close to the vest. They're not ready to show what cards they have in their hand. And the budget discussions, as I assume you all know, are a multiple-headed set of decisions that are going to be made. There's a line that I learned in Albany in my first year as an assemblyman. Nothing gets done in Albany until everything gets done. Meaning every issue is leverage in the discussion of the next issue, and the agreements come when we agree on all of these different pieces, what gets kicked out, what gets to stay in. So I would suspect this will be part of that discussion, and at some point in time, usually about a week out before the deadline date, if they're going to hit the mark on March 31st, it'll happen. Sometimes you go a week or two later. The days of really late budgets are over. In the last 20 years, there's only been one budget in 2010 that was extended late until August, and that was the battle over the year where there was the big loss of revenue at the state level. After the 2008, 2009 crash, 2010 was just an impossible budget. But in most cases, we would expect to know and have an idea. Now, if it's not in the budget, and I hope that it is in the budget, it's essential that it be in the budget. But if it isn't in the budget, then we have to go the standard legislation route, and we would need a Senate companion bill to the Assembly bill that we have. I'm sorry to give you all this backstage at the Ritz stuff, but you ought to know that if you spend 13 years up there, you have some idea of how it works, and I'm trying to evidence that right now. So, other questions? Do we have other questions? Yes. Well, Martin and then John again.
Yeah, you foresee the 1% increase as permanent. There's the 2 years of, where you pledge not to increase property taxes, but you foresee the 1% being.
Well, the purpose of the sunset, Martin, is the state's desire. And they want you to go and re-justify any levy at periodic basis. For sales tax, it's 2 years. Hotel occupancy tax, I think a mortgage recording tax are 3 year cycles. If this does what we accomplish it to do, it will not complete everything that we have to do. You know, the fund balance, as an example, 2 years of additional money in the fund balance will not take us to 170. It'll take us in that direction. So we would expect that if it works as planned, if we're able to freeze taxes, if some of our colleagues do the same at their local levels, if they can do that, then we'll be able to show a benefit by doing this and then maintain that. But that we're jumping ahead of ourselves. And if they make an independent judgment of whether they want to do it now, they will make another independent judgment of doing the same thing 2 years hence. So in 2021, we would probably be back having the discussion about this. But, you know, we'll deal with one step at a time, and we'll see if this gets us to the next step. John?
If this doesn't pass, is there a plan B besides the county center parking lot? What other measures would you be taking?
Well, I tend to have a Plan B press conference, should that happen. And I don't think that'll be my most fun press conference in my short tenure as county executive, because the worst case scenario is bad. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's bad. Warren said it accurately. We all know it. We all live it. There's a couple of revenue streams that we have. If you shut off one of the revenue streams, you won't let us have additional resources through that stream. If on the other stream that you have, you've limited us, and maybe rightfully so, and we ourselves self-limited us, then there's no place to go to get the money. And then you're talking about a devolution of the government as we have it now. And you're talking about assets that I have argued through my campaign for this job, throughout my whole career, and in my first year plus, that I would not do, that I will be forced to look at and consider. And we will put all options on the table for the public to understand what the cost of it is if we don't have additional non-property tax revenue. And there's a host of things, and you know, people say, well, that's horrific. Well, you know, the time to solve the problem is before the horrific moment. I think about this on a personal level. I'm overweight. What can I do today to avoid the heart attack that is inevitable if I don't start watching myself? When the heart attack comes, I wish I had an extra year to change my behavior. So what do? You change your behavior now. Do the right thing now. Don't wait for the heart attack to come, both on a personal level, speaking to myself in public, but on the county level, speaking to the county, to the state legislature, to the county legislature, everybody who wants to listen. Do the right thing now. Don't get lost in rhetoric. Don't get lost in ideology. Don't convince yourself there's an easy way, because there isn't an easy way. There isn't an easy way. There's only a tough way. And if you're prepared to understand that Plan B is really not what you want, then take a hard look at Plan A and give me a real good reason why you can't do this plan. I think we're good. Thank you for your time. You're welcome to speak to anybody on the road.